When the founding president Jomo Kenyatta died at an advanced age, a shaken and mournful nation could not ask questions. But his press officer who watched him through his last earthly assignment was quietly and bitterly pointing an accusing finger.
Mahehu was there. Mbio Koinange was there. Mahehu was his trusted provincial commissioner. Mbio Koinange was not only the Minister of State in the office of the President, he was also Kenyatta's brother-in-law. Why didn't they take Kenyatta to State House Mombasa? And the Pandia Memorial Hospital is there. Kenyatta was commander-in-chief of the armed forces. Denta Nigechoro, Colonel Denta Nigechoro, the then commander of the Kenya Air Force, should have been told to bring a caribou and the very Kenyatta to Nairobi Hospital. But then first aid should have received the first aid in Pandia Memorial Hospital or wherever.
Kenyatta's last day was spent here at the Msambweni Primary School, and Lee Njiru recalls a day that had all the hallmarks of things going astray.
Even before he collapsed, they should have seen Kenyatta's behavior in the State House at lunchtime. When he hosted Kenya's foreign envoys, they had been recalled from briefing. Yeah. Kenyatta was in a state of fluster. Yeah. Even going to Msambweni, he was not himself. He even did something which he has never done before. He forgot his trademark, fly whiskey. We had to send a car back to collect it, and we had to stop with the ferry.
He calls it a matter of fate. Lee Njiru was only a junior information officer in Kakamega, the headquarters of what used to be the Western Province, when he was ordered to report to the State House, Nakuru. One of President Kenyatta's press officers had taken leave, and the State House required a temporary replacement. That temporary replacement was to last in the State House for 25 years.
When I went to State House in Nakuru, I was taken to Mzee Kenyatta. He was in a small room. He was with the late Minister of State, Peter Mbio Koinange. So when I was being introduced to Kenyatta, I trembled because I had heard so many stories about Kenyatta, that his eyes were on the forehead, he had a hairy tongue. So with that kind of mysterious characterization of Kenyatta, so you had to tremble. So Kenyatta said, Bio Nikara Inaina, meaning Bio is trembling. But Bio assisted me. He said, it is the right of every citizen to tremble in front of his president.
You know, he had those eyes whereby you feel sometimes loved, sometimes intimidated. You do not know where it is. I think it's the power.
During the struggle for independence, I used to hear people say, Kenyatta wa Muigai newe kingi wa Ndwairo. Simply means that Jomo Kenyatta was the king of the African people. I think the praise of that song got into Kenyatta's head. I think he actually did come to believe that he was an African king, and it was his entitlement.
You know, his eyes were rough.
Jomo Kenyatta easily stood out among leaders agitating for Kenya's independence. He was much older than most of his freedom struggle peers, but also had the air of the leader of choice in the group, complete with a commanding presence and voice.
My leadership has not been to darkness and death, but to light and prosperity.
He was, as a result, the unanimous pick of all the leaders, including Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, who turned down an offer by the colonial authorities that would have made him the first prime minister of a self-governing Kenya. Oginga Odinga instead made a terse demand: there will be no independence without Jomo Kenyatta.
Jaramogi insisted, when the British governor wanted to hand him over power before independence, that no, for two reasons. One, he said, and this is quite a Luo looking at things, that the Kikuyu had shed blood for the liberation of the country more than any other group, ethnically speaking. And therefore, it would have been wrong in Jaramogi's assessment for someone else coming from a different community which had not shed as much blood, quantitatively speaking, to then assume power. That to him, that was unfair. And then there was Jomo Kenyatta, who was older, who was more worldly, who was more experienced, and who, like Mandela in South Africa, the mentioning of his name would rally the country together, that was a good thing. So he said, no, give Jomo a chance first. Without Jomo, there is no independence.
At an age estimated at over 70, Jomo Kenyatta became the country's first prime minister and a year later, first president. Harambe, Swahili for pulling together, became his rallying call for the new nation, whose myriad challenges included healing the rifts arising from the bitter struggle for freedom, particularly in Kenyatta's native central Kenya region. Kenyatta wasted no time in exerting his authority and showcasing his style.
He was managing people that he was able to manage. And the one important thing he did is to make the Kikuyus who disagreed in total, because some of them were corroborated with the British during the war. And the way we were saying, when Kenyatta comes back, we shall eliminate those who corroborated with the imperialists. But when he came back here, to surprise of everyone, he said, we are all same. We all fought for independence, even those corroborators. And therefore we have to work together for the good of this nation.
Kenyatta is a very interesting person. One of all, he is conscious of dissent. He didn't like controversial views against his administration. And put it this way, he was conscious that probably if you said something against his administration or against Kenyatta himself, he takes offense.
The people surrounding him, and especially the security people, most of them were illiterate. And they were upbeat. They were mesmerized by power.
My first assignment as a district officer was in Mombasa, and the founder of the nation was fond of, working from Mombasa, the State House in Mombasa, and this very, very serious or liking. He was fond of our traditional dancers. So after dinner every evening, there was traditional dancers performance from various groups in the coast, and we in the administration, we are supposed to be organizing these people every evening. And that was very, very interesting.
The newly independent nation was, however, to fall into the trap of the so-called ideological war of the 60s between the West and the East, capitalism and communism, the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, or Soviet Union. The intrigues of the complex Cold War struck the heart of the Kenyan government, separating Mzee Jomo Kenyatta and his close friend and Vice President Oginga Odinga.
Naturally, Jaramogi thought, I would succeed Kenyatta. So when he was saying, he said Kenyatta was a second god, in fact. And he said there could be no independence without Kenyatta. I mean, Jaramogi was a Kenyatta sycophant.
The Americans and the Chinese, Russians were at that time involved very deeply in the Cold War. They immediately after independence, the ambassadors started influencing Kenyan leadership, new Kenyan leadership.
Initially, the struggle was between those who supported capitalism and those who supported socialism. But one side had the freedom to express itself. The other side didn't have the freedom to express itself.
My understanding of both, none of them was saying the truth. Kenyatta was not an African socialist, he was a pure capitalist. Odinga, on the other hand, I don't see him as a communist, he was just another capitalist.
The problem haikukuwa kwa mzee na haikukuwa kwa Jaramogi. This was an instigated problem from outside.
He was a vice president for a very short time. And within that short time, when he realized that his policies were not being implemented, he could not agree with Kenyatta. I think it's because of the policies. He had different policies from what Kenyatta had. That was the biggest problem. And he would tell the public what he feels should be done.
My personal view about that is that Odinga was not flexible.
They did not have any problem with Jaramogi. You remember, he even would travel to Nyanza, spend the nights at Jaramogi's place. At that time, we didn't have even a state lodge in Kisumu. He was wearing that thing, the cap. But a stage reached where I think these Cold War tactics started indicating, penetrating with messages which were probably not genuine, which would make each faction so and so anataka kukutoa kwa serikali, anataka kukuangusha. And they started suspecting one another, not knowing where the problem, the genesis of the problem was.
Jaramogi was an open-minded person. He was a great believer in his type of politics, in his ideology. He believed that given a fair chance, he could win as easily as anybody else. He was a believer in democracy. He probably did not realize the extent to which the other side would go in destroying him, and that the other side was not democratic at all.
The fighting was over power. Even though nobody wants to talk about it, I think even if they had not discussed the issue of succession, I think it was quite obvious to Jaramogi and the rest that were around Kenyatta that Kenyatta was quite elderly by the time he took over power. Naturally, most people would have expected that he would relinquish the reins of power before he died.
The moment you have a deputy who is also aggressive, you'll definitely accuse him for that. Because if you have somebody who has got his own opinion, who makes his own opinion and sticks to it, there's no way you can work. And I think that's what Jaramogi was.
The perceived Kenyatta-Odinga rivalry culminated in a series of tragic events that began with the assassination of Pio Gama Pinto, a freedom fighter of Goan descent.
It is sad when you think that the first victim of assassination was a Goan fellow called Gama Pinto, who I worked very closely with Gama Pinto in the early days. I was the editor of the Citizen newspaper, and at the same time we edited the Tribune newspaper. These are papers agitating for independence of Kenya. And I know Gama very well, Pinto. I've worked with him very closely. He should have not been the one who will be assassinated on the after independence. It's a very ugly situation.
Pio Gama Pinto was killed because he was said to be the brain behind the socialist movement in Kenya. He was the advisor of Jaramogi Oginga Odinga. Oginga Odinga's position was clear. He had made it clear. He was a socialist.
A year after Pio Gama Pinto's death came the political liquidation of Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, who was then the vice president of both the country and the ruling party, KANU. The mastermind of the liquidation process was Tom Mboya, the youthful political genius that was Kenyatta's sidekick.
He was eloquent, he was smart, he knew what he was doing.
I remember Tom Mboya very well as a young man because we lived with him in Ziwani. And my father used to be the main milk distributor for the African estates. And I used to take milk to his house every morning. He was a very charming person, very good, very happy, but also aggressive. And he was likable and forceful.
He was a very, very good worker, and I'm sure Kenyatta would still have wanted a person like Tom, who would be able to run around and do the work, not to use anybody, but to work by himself.
Tom Mboya, being Secretary General, was very close to Mzee. And the Americans would try to get channels of getting messages to Mzee about what the Russians and the Chinese were doing.
Tom Mboya at the same time was very intelligent and very focused, because I think he knew that since Jomo Kenyatta was old, he was the most likely person to take over. And he decided to be closer to Kenyatta.
But Mboya himself could not last long after helping remove Oginga from the political center. A gunman fired several rounds at Mboya as he stepped out of a chemist along present-day Moi Avenue. Mboya died in an ambulance that was on its way to the Nairobi hospital.
Tom Mboya was not killed for the same reason that you would say Pio Gama Pinto. Pio Gama Pinto was killed because he was said to be the brain behind the socialist movement in Kenya.
I do remember the Langas House Constitutional Conference because I was for a regional system of government, Majimbo, although I was in KANU. Tom Mboya was for a central system of government. And I do remember telling Tom, a central system of government is dictatorship. You'll pay for it one day. Of course, he paid with his life. It's sad when you think about it.
Whatever ate Tom Mboya was the struggle between him and his fellow capitalists when it came to the question of succeeding Kenyatta. Because even then, Kenyatta looked very old. It's like nobody knew how long he had to go before he passed on. And people were jostling for positions, each wanting to be in a position where they would be able to inherit if Kenyatta died.
Maybe those who were in power at that time felt that Tom Mboya might be a challenge later on. And he could have been. With his organizational ability, he could be a threat. So probably to the powers that be at that time, they thought, I think the time has gone, he has to go. And finally he had to go.
It was the killing of Tom Mboya that finally gave an ethnic tilt to the Kenyatta-Oginga differences. A ceremony to open the present-day New Nyanza General Hospital in Kisumu ended up being a platform of Luo resentment against the Kenyatta administration. President Kenyatta traveled to Kisumu to open the hospital, but the ceremony, coming only 4 months after the killing of Tom Mboya, ended in bloodshed, with the presidential guard and the police shooting many people dead when a commotion occurred within the presidential dais.
Mzee went there as head of state and the head of government to open the hospital. And he went round because we traveled from Nakuru, Eldoret, down to Kakamega and then Kisumu. And he arrived there very jovial. Jaramogi was there waiting for him. Na walisalimiana. Walisalimiana. Lakini, for one reason or another, kelele ya vijana ikaanza sasa booing Mzee Kenyatta. And Mzee Kenyatta has a security. And you know, the presidents have so many people as security. Sasa wakaingilia wale vijana. Na wale vijana wanawasukuma. Ukisukuma askari na yeye iko na bunduki, wakaanza kupiga bunduki.
Some people who did not want Odinga to speak in that meeting, but his people insisted that he must speak. So that's where the confrontation started.
I was not the PC there, but I was in uniform. Morogoro was the PC. Morogoro, wakati watu ya security sasa walianza kuintervene to cool down these people. The ministers who were accompanying the president went and sat together with Mzee together, and the security surrounded Mzee. PC akaingia ndani ya hospitali because the actually opening was outside. PC akaingia ndani ya hospitali, Jaramogi akaingia ndani ya hospitali. Sasa hii vijana wakawachwa hapo na askari wanawatwanga. So I had now to jump in because I was in uniform to tell the askaris, because I knew them by name, having been going to Gatundu every week. I knew them by name, so I would say, wewe wacha hiyo fulani, Kamodho wacha hiyo, fulani wacha hiyo. It cooled down and we opened, Mzee opened the hospital. Lakini alikula maneno makali.
Kitu gani KPU? Panasema tume. Wanaleta nini katika Kenya? Wanafanyia nini katika nchi hii ya Wajaluo? Wanafanya nini KPU? Tuambieni. Baada ya watu yako kutia tupa maneno pale, wamepata faida gani? Wengi watalala ndani ya jela. Wengi wamekusha pigwa na askari. Walipata faida gani? Unafikiri mimi naweza kupenda mambo kama hayo? Wako na njaa. Kwa nini wewe hapana mpero ya chakula? Unashibisha tumbo yako na wao na wacha na njaa. Unaambia kwenda sana.
The events in Kisumu were the final nail on the coffin of the Kenyatta-Oginga relations and the culmination of one of Kenya's longest-running ethnic rivalries.
The difference was not tribal. Now, when this happens, when Jaramogi is politically destroyed, and obviously by Kenyatta and his coterie, who happen to be Kikuyu, and then quickly afterwards, Jaramogi's rival in national politics, not just Luo politics, Tom Mboya is assassinated. As a community, the Luos immediately realize, so we are not dealing with friends. We are not dealing with compatriots. What then unites us?
The Luos do have a sense of being victimized by the previous regimes in this country. That's the Kenyatta regime, the Moi regime, and the Kibaki regime. So anytime a community has got that feeling of having been victims, then they rally around anyone who they feel is defender of the community.
This so-called rivalry was artificially created by the elite around Kenyatta that thought that the only way to survive was to get rid of a competitor who was not really a rival or even an enemy. And that then set in motion the so-called intractable historical rivalry between the Luo and the Kikuyu. It has never been.
The killing of Tom Mboya and the shootings in the Nyanza General Hospital came as part of a season of heightened intolerance that saw the Kenyatta administration cracking down hard on political opposition, banning political parties and detaining political leaders. The pattern was replicated in elections of 1969, where state agencies ensured KANU domination.
I was detained in 1967. Absolutely, there was no reasons at all. I was accused of plotting to overthrow the legally constituted government of the Republic of Kenya. I didn't have a gun, I didn't have a soldier, I didn't have a bullet. But there it is, I was sent behind bars in committee, next almost to the gallows, just to frighten me. I was a security risk.